Okay, on here now is lesson 80, and so far what we've done is we've done Kotter and Schlesinger's change and why it's so difficult to implement change, and Kotter's and Schlesinger's 6 methods of implementing change, and how a manager needs to really think his way through his skills and also the skills of his workforce and the attitudes of his workforce when designing a change program. Right, but now we're going to look at organisations, and here we're looking at a mechanistic organisation in relation to an organic organisation. Now, whenever we're actually doing these subjects, the reason why it's so important is because if you can get your workers working in the right sort of way, so they will increase their productivity and also they're totally engaged in terms of what they're doing. One, they're going to be happier, but also your organisation is actually going to be far, far more successful. So that's what you're always looking at. So anyway, so within a mechanistic organisation, you have individual specialisation. Employees will work separately and they'll work on tasks. There'll be a very rigid hierarchy of authority, will be well defined. Decision making will tend to be centralised. Extensive use of rules and procedures, and a lot of written communication in terms of what you're actually doing. Right. Mechanistic, as it actually says. Now you are going to argue there that this is a little bit maybe more theory X than theory Y in terms of its work. Right, but obviously as we move on in time, we're moving to much more organic organisation, where much more task culture, where employees will work together and coordinate tasks. They will integrate systems. You'll have individuals working together, trying to get the maximum output that they can possibly get. Task forces and teams are primary integrating systems. You have decentralisation. You're going to have a lot of delegation in there, where authority is passed down to the workforce. A lot of face-to-face contact, and a lot of informal status. So if you have to be really good at your job, therefore that's where you're going to get your status. You're not necessarily going to be given your status because you happen to have a higher rank than someone else. So this here is like an organic organisation, and this one over here is a mechanistic organisation. Lots of rules, centralised. Whereas this one here is a decentralised organisation here, so therefore it's organic, and perhaps is going to be much more creative in terms of all of that. So you could argue that a lot of the managing change process these days is about getting this sort of organisation working for you. Thank you. We're still looking at managing change and barriers to change. On this lecture here, so we're still on lesson 80. On here we've got the various barriers to change. I've also put in Lewin's force field analysis model also down here. I've also got Kotter's and Schlesinger's idea about why it's so difficult to change people around because of these 4 factors. Remember, parochial self-interest, misunderstanding, a lack of trust, different assessments of the workers. They may view the whole change process in a totally different way, and there's also a pretty low tolerance of change from here. However, right, they do have a process which is Kotter's and Schlesinger's process of 6 ways in which you can initiate change, which is education and communication. You've got to participate and involve people, facilitation support, or you can negotiation and agreement, or you can manipulation and co-option, whereby you actually try and sort of bring and buy people on board and pretend and put them on the board of directors, so therefore they may believe in the change. And lastly, explicit and implicit coercion, which is just saying, right, this is what we're going to do, and if you don't like it, you're going to change your job, and you may even lose your job, and we may make you redundant if you're not willing to do it. Now, a person who wants to instigate change can use any of these systems, and we're not necessarily saying that this particular system here, explicit and implicit coercion, is necessarily wrong. If you've got a very short space of time which to do something, if the survival of the organisation is at risk, then you're going to have to use something like this model. Okay, so but these are, once again, just a quick summary here of all the barriers to train, or of all the barriers to change that can happen within an organisation. There's not enough understanding about the actual change itself. And secondly, there's a lack of leadership, there's a lack of focus and strong project management of the whole project. no engagement and buy-in of key stakeholders. So you're not getting the key people. You're building up a coalition of people who are willing to implement that change. There is no clear process for managing endings and beginnings. You've got all the various people issues on here, which is this bit over here, and people are not involved in developing quick wins. So you need a few quick things to happen to show that the change is in fact going to work. Sustained success is not recognised and progress is not measured or reviewed. So these are all those barriers, and if you can overcome all of those, then you're going to have quite a successful change process involved. And then we can start applying this to reality, and we can look at Barclays Bank and the process that Anthony Jenkins has got to go through. Is it really possible to change around Barclays Bank into a moral and ethical bank? It's well nigh, well, you could argue that it's just going to be very, very, very difficult. However, with some organisations it may actually be easier to do these things. So these are the various barriers to change, and these are the ways of overcoming all those different types of change on there. Okay, so this is managing change and change leadership now. And we're almost getting towards the end of this subject. There's going to be one more lesson after this. Now, I'm just going to go back to this organic structure again, or even it's sometimes called organismic structure by Burns and Stalker. Now, what they tend to find was, what they were looking for were organisations that everybody was sort of equal, and there's a constant change of information, and your status depended on how good you were at your job. And there was a free flow of ideas all the way through the organisation. There weren't any levels of hierarchy and everything else. So everyone was at equal levels, no job descriptions, communication. There was a hub network, people got together, lots of face-to-face contact, requires a lot of cooperation and constant adjustment. And they, in a way, thought that this would be the best organisation to have. It would be have the most potential, and also be the most productive. Now, a background to this is with employees, and this is a really important topic because most employees go to work and they want to be satisfied at work because they spend a lot of time at work. So if you can survive change, then people need to flourish in an ever-changing environment, because change is always going to be upon you. So therefore people have to be able to adapt, but they also want to be able to adapt and flourish in that particular environment on there. So this requires courageous leadership on people's behalf. So that you have people here and you have the potential here, but it also requires an organisation to have a leader who sees how this organisation could work. Now, what this means is that there is dissatisfaction with the present, shared vision of the future, some first practical steps. So what I'm trying to say here is there's dissatisfaction with the present, put it all in one sentence. There's a shared vision of the future, so there's an idea about what your organisation could be like and how well it could do in the future if it adapts. But you need some practical steps in order to get there, and that's really what we've been talking about. We looked at the 10 barriers to change, and we looked at Kotter's and Schlesinger's model about how you can implement that change from there. So hence we have this subject called change leadership, which is all about changing an organisation around. Now, on this one, you need to diagnose the types of resistance and adapt your strategy according to the situation that you're in. And then you have this model on here, which is a strategic continuum. Now, if we're in a real crisis, then you want to have that change working very, very quickly for you. So in that case, you will coerce people and say, look, if we don't change, then we're going to go under. So therefore, there's going to be little involvement of people, there's going to be an attempt to overcome resistance, so you're probably going to implicit and explicit coercion in terms of getting people to do it, and you've got to have a clear plan about how it's going to be done. However, if you're not quite sure of what you're trying to achieve, but also you have got time in which to do it, then you want to involve a lot of people and you want to minimise that resistance to the whole change process. So you want to involve people and say, right, this is where we want to be in the future. Now, these are the 4 things on here, and the amount and kind of resistance that is anticipated. So you need to anticipate how much resistance are we going to have from this particular project, how much power do we have, who holds the power in this organisation, will those people in this organisation be willing to change, the person who has the relevant data for designing the change. Where's all that information going to go? Is that information going to be spread throughout the whole organisation? And also the stakes involved, right? And often, I think when Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 1997, it was pretty clear he had an incredibly good track record, but he also recognised that they had to change quickly if they were going to survive. So therefore, that change process was relatively easy. If we take Anthony Jenkins at Barclays Bank, that's much more difficult because the company was making vast amounts of money supposedly before he came along, and then he's coming in and saying, right, now you're going to make less money and you're going to be moral and ethical and moving away from the casino culture. So there's going to be a completely different assessment from the workers about how that organisation should proceed in terms of Anthony Jenkins. So that organisation is going to be incredibly difficult to turn around from there. So we've almost got to the last point on the managing change option. But fundamentally, what you're looking at is, this is when people go to work, right? And change is going to take place, as when we look at the manufacturing module on here, but change is going to take place. So people need to survive the change and they need to flourish in an ever-changing environment. So that is going to take a lot of very courageous leadership to be able to implement that change within that organisation. Okay. Change leadership. Change, and this is lesson 80. And this is produced by Charles Sand. It's a really simple model. All it says is you have your core workers, and then these days you can have lots of part-time workers. And this is how organisations will develop into the future. Mind you, that was written about 20 odd years ago. But one thing that is common in organisations now is, why on earth have you got all these different levels of management? Because then you have to pass information all the way up. Why not trust the employees? Why not delegate to the employees and let them make decisions and everything else? Much more flexible employment these days, so if you've got a really good employer, then maybe we can offer them different contracts, many more women at work, and they want to look after their kids and also go to work, so maybe they can work from home. You've already talked about an organic structure where there's your sort of status in a way is dependent upon your ability to actually do the job and what you can add to the job, so it's a much more organic organisation. And over here we have the knowledge management and the information management and the reports that need to go to management. So the more sophisticated your reporting system is, the better your organisation will be. So basically, this module is saying that organisations are going to have to change all the time. There's a big change environment out there. What is the best way to increase productivity? And the management of the changing process is actually incredibly difficult to do. So that's the whole picture. Thank you.